Hello and welcome to Lewis and Clark's Day Historic Site. My name is Ben and I work here as a site interpreter. Today we're going to jump into Independence Day, celebrating July 4th, as Lewis and Clark would have and the men of their expedition. Independence Day for Lewis and Clark and the soldiers that made up the Corps of Discovery would have been something they grew up celebrating. Most of them would have been children, if they were even born at the time of the Declaration of Independence. And so to them, it was a peak holiday. It would have been right up there with Christmas and New Year's Day, if not more important, because this was a big civic public holiday. Independence Day would have been celebrated with church bells ringing, cannon fire, parades of militia and the army. There would often be a lot of barbecues where everyone would get together and there were speeches and toasts given. John Adams, when he was writing to his wife, Abigail Adams, about what he expected Independence Day to become, wrote this. Think about Independence Day and compare it to this description as I'm ready to read. Independence Day will be the most memorable epoch in the history of America. I'm apt to believe that it will be celebrated by succeeding generations as the great anniversary festival. It ought to be commemorated as the day of deliverance by solemn acts of devotion to God Almighty. It ought to be solemnized with pomp and parade, with shows, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and illuminations from one end of this continent to the other, from this time forward forevermore. Lewis and Clark would actually be a part of from this end of the continent to the other. John Adams' prediction for what Independence Day would look like is pretty spot on. We have parades, we have shows and games, illuminations and bonfires, plenty of fireworks, and if you go to the right parades, there's even cannon or musket fire to celebrate the day as well. So this Independence Day of the late 18th century feels very familiar to us in the 21st century. The Independence Day of back then would be a little different, of course. Their parades would often be a little more formal U.S. Army and state militia doing their marching and parades, less of the local politicians and different community groups doing their things in their parades like we see today. Another difference is that they would not have had the Star-Spangled Banner to celebrate with. That wouldn't be written until the War of 1812, and so they may have sung Chester or other patriotic songs as a way of celebrating the holiday. One big difference, there was always barbecues and big meals for the whole public to come to. One big difference, though, is that there was a lot more toasting back then than there is now. Everyone would be served a drink. It didn't necessarily have to be alcoholic. But if it was often punch or rum or whiskey. The wealthier people might also provide some sort of fortified wine, like Madeira. But whatever it is, a host would go around and make some official toasts to liberty, to the Declaration of Independence, to the President of the United States, to George Washington. There was often a set way that people would celebrate some of these toasts. And we don't see as much of that anymore, but this is a trend that continued into the mid to late 19th century. We're looking at toasting being a very important part of Independence Day. And there's some common themes to these toasts. Often, there is one to Independence Day itself. July 4th, 1776, when the Declaration of Independence was agreed to, and the United States broke away from Great Britain. You might hear one like this: "To the anniversary of American independence, may our posterity never have cause to commemorate a similar event. We are so glad that we have our independence. Hopefully we never go to war like this again." They might often be toast to ideas, self-governance, commerce, patriotism. Here's one as a toast to liberty in 1811. "While liberty holds her temple on earth, it will be hailed with acclamations of joy." You can see some of these get a little flowery and wordy sometimes. These toasts were often to people as well. A very common toast was to George Washington. Everyone seemed to agree that they could get behind George Washington, both while he was still alive and later on when he had passed away. Here's one from 1807. "The memory of Washington. May we honor it by an imitation of his virtues and adhere to his counsel." Another one from 1803. "Washington's memory, a monument more durable than marble or brass, erected in the hearts of his grateful countrymen." There is usually one to women, and one may sound like this from 1800. "The American fair, although last toasted, the first in our hearts. Other common people that might be presented is whoever's hosting the event may have a toast in their honor. Maybe an important politician or wartime hero from your state might be included. Things were also toasted. So from time to time, you would see a toast to states, particularly which state you're from. You may have one to the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence. For example, this 1797 toast, as remembered by John Adams. The Constitution and laws. May Americans ever remember that law is liberty, and the Constitution, the sacred palladium of political safety. Again, these could get kind of formal and wordy. Other times they were pretty short, as we'll see in a little bit. Some of these toasts were often not so nice. They were political jabs. They may be a toast to someone, but in a backhanded way. For example, in 1807, as Thomas Jefferson is kind of wrapping up his time in office, this is written either by one of his enemies within his own party, or more likely a Federalist from Massachusetts. This toast went, "The President of the United States, may his contemplated retirement be as glorious as the setting sun." So sometimes there could be a bit of a harsh jab to them as well. Now, there are no hard and fast rules for these toasts. There are a few guidelines that most people would follow. There was usually 13 official toasts, although sometimes it was the number of current states in the Union. So 13 for the original colonies. At the time of Lewis and Clark, it may have been 15 toasts because there was 15 states. I would recommend, if you're going to try your own toast at home this Independence Day, that you keep it down to the 13, because 50 of any drink is going to be quite a bit. These toasts can be long and formal, like the ones I've been reading to you, or they can be quite short and concise. John Adams, someone asked him for a toast that they could share on his behalf in 1826. Now, this is a much older Adams who's no longer really in the public spotlight as much, and he gave a 2-word toast to be shared: "Independence forever." And he would not elaborate on his toast anymore. Now, these toasts usually include a few that you kind of have to have. One for George Washington, either to his memory, to his example, something of that sort. There's usually the one to women. And more often than not, there was a toast to the current President of the United States and a founding document. Sometimes it was the Constitution. Sometimes it was the idea of the law. Other times it was the Declaration of Independence. But if you're doing 13 toasts, that gives you a lot of room to toast to things that you think are important to you. So go ahead and try it at home. I'm going to do one for you as my viewers. To my viewers, may they continue to expand their minds and their pursuit of a rich knowledge of history. See, I got a little bit of that flowery language in there as well. So what is your toast this Independence Day? Go ahead and write it in the comments below. Or do you have a favorite one from history that you'd like to share? Let us know in the comments. You can check out all our other videos on YouTube, and of course always at www.campdubois.com. Thanks for watching.